We are back. Hope 2020 continues. This is the first Monday ever of the Hackers on Planet Earth conference. We're making history right here. You're part of it. Thanks for joining us. This talk is by Rizek Wozniak Mikhail. He is the Chief Information Security Officer at the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. He's got a lot to say, and we're going to not talk about it, we're going to show it. Let's roll that movie, and then we'll be back for some live discussion afterwards.
Hi and hello. We're going to talk today about how censorship is no longer interpreted as damage, and what can we do about this. My name is Michał Rysiek Woźniak, although most people just know me as Rysiek. I am not related to Steve Wozniak, but I do have opinions about Apple, some of them even on topic. For the last 5 years, I had worked for the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project. Unsurprisingly, we had to deal with our share of traffic spikes and censorship attempts. I'd like to share some of the know-how gathered and code written throughout this time. Opinions I voice in this talk are my own and do not necessarily represent those of my employers. Also, I apologize for the sound quality on this recording. I started my online adventures, as I imagine many of you have, in a simpler time, when the internet was this new amazing technology, the information superhighway, the series of tubes where a blog could be set up in a broom closet by everyone and their dog, and nobody could tell them apart. The dog and everyone, that is, although I'm sure there were and are many who still cannot tell a blog from a broom closet. In this cyberland before time, the internet would interpret censorship as damage and root around it. Governments seemed comically helpless as far as anything digital was concerned. Whenever they tried to block anything, the internet would get a strong systemic allergic reaction known as the Streisand effect, and information would simply still flow. But that was then. Today, effective web censorship is within reach not only for China, who is willing to invest heavily into building their own in-house technology and capacity, but also to less dedicated but no less censorship-eager regimes like UK, Russia, or Azerbaijan. Case in point, a few years ago, I have seen a local independent media site blocked completely in Kazakhstan, even though the site was behind Cloudflare. How? The block was server name indication based and almost certainly used off-the-shelf hardware sold by one of the major companies. Why even decrypt TLS traffic if the domain name is transmitted in the clear text anyway? Point is, censorship technology has taken huge strides in the last decade. Hardware has become more powerful and less expensive, and predefined filters are available for sale on the open market. At the same time, and no less importantly, more and more content became accessible solely, only through fewer and fewer gatekeepers, making the censors' jobs considerably easier. These are just a few censorship or surveillance events or deployments that we know of. We know that Blue Coat has been used in Syria thanks to telecomics. We know that Huawei is used as the backbone of internet censorship, internet filtering in the UK. And we know that Rode and Schwarz sold censorship equipment to Turkmenistan. These are these are off-the-shelf devices. This is a business that provides products to whoever can pay for them, and the price is not very high. And the problem is centralization. Centralization is the damage to the internet, and there are multiple companies that are, let's say, most guilty of that. These are Facebook, Cloudflare, and Amazon, and Google, and Apple. And don't get me wrong, I am no fan of other big tech companies, but in the context of this talk, these are the most relevant. For years, activists like myself warned that putting all your content in the big tech basket will end badly. That this creates single points of failure that will be difficult to work around in case of issues. Today we have specific examples for those companies and other big tech players thwarting attempts at keeping the information flowing. For example, Facebook experimented with their Explore feed in Serbia and caused independent media sites to lose half of the traffic just because there were more clicks for the users to get access to their posts. Or Cloudflare had in 2019 had a half an hour outage affecting 12 million sites globally. That's 80% of Cloudflare hosted sites then, due to a regular expression error. But of course, Google and Amazon killing off domain fronting suspiciously soon after Roskomnadzor complained about Telegram and Signal using that and using Google's and Amazon's infrastructure, thus screwing Signal over. Finally, Apple in China banning VPNs from the Chinese App Store at the request of Beijing. This is a good overview of possible issues, from innocent mistakes through callous experimentation to outright willful complicity. And with the sheer amount of users affected, this becomes a huge problem. Anyone can make a mistake, but if you're handling 12 million sites, then a lot is depending on you not making such a mistake. At the same time, these companies' services are billed as solutions to internet censorship. Like encrypted SNI, which supposedly solves the issue of SNI-based censorship. It can only work with large providers like Cloudflare, where an innocent-looking domain can be used to front for a blocked site. Thus, it creates an incentive for more websites to move behind Cloudflare, centralizing the internet more. This just moves the problem. Sooner or later, China and others will find ways to influence or pressure Cloudflare into dropping certain websites or not providing the service in China, like they can already clearly influence Google or Apple. It's as if we are trying to fix problems caused by centralization by just a bit more centralization. We need something better than what basically amounts to technological homeopathy. Now, I am making a few assumptions in this talk. First of all, I am assuming we're not dealing with The Guardian or Washington Post or New York Times level of or amounts of traffic. If you're dealing with that, you probably know more than I do, and I would love to talk to you. Secondly, I'm assuming we're dealing with a public site and one that is hosting reasonably static content, meaning visitors don't need to log in and content is not bespoke or dynamically created per visitor or per visit. I'm also assuming that there is some technical capacity in the organization running the website, so that tools or techniques or suggestions that I will be mentioning can be deployed and managed in-house. As always, there are no silver bullets. Everything comes at a cost. Everything is a is a trade-off. And finally, I am assuming that we're trying to deal with targeted web blocking, not just all-out shutting down the whole internet in a particular region. If the internet is down, the internet is down. There's not much that can be done by means of deploying something on your website. Let's talk about the usual suspects. Obviously, the Tor browser, VPNs, Siphon are all offer ways for determined users to access blocked resources. They're invaluable and effective. If you can, you should absolutely, by all means, deploy a Tor hidden service for your site. But they do not work at a scale. It is not reasonable to expect the whole population of a country to download the Tor browser or use VPNs. Instead, I want to focus on strategies website admins can employ to make their content available to visitors without requiring those visitors to do anything, to download a piece of software or to change their browser settings or to do anything different than what they do usually uh, when they browse the internet. Let's get this out of the way. Blockchain is not a solution, and it cannot really be a solution in this particular case. But if you would like me to explore why blockchain is not suited for this particular goal, just buy some Rishek coin, join the ICO, buy some tokens, and I'm super happy to provide information why blockchain is useless here. But seriously, let's start with some very basic, reasonably simple don'ts. These are things that happen all over the place on a lot of websites, and as simple as they are, they really make certain things very complicated if you want to do something more, if you want to do something interesting with anti-censorship. So first of all, hard coding absolute URLs or saving them in the database as many CMSs do by default, this is not a good thing. This means that it's impossible to move to a different domain quickly if you need to. For example, it makes it impossible to or hard to quickly deploy a testing site because you will find that your images or URLs point to the production site or vice versa. and also it makes it impossible to run a Tor hidden service effectively if your CMS insists on always going back to the standard URL containing the default domain. That means that deploying a Tor hidden service is that much harder, and there's always going to be a little bit of a few requests that go back to the clear text domain. And then it makes it harder to do some other funkier things that I will cover a little bit later. Second don't. Just don't do that. The name that me and a friend of mine came up for this is barnacle trackers. Think of a hull of a ship covered in barnacles. You can imagine how effective they are in slowing the ship down and making things complicated. Including dozens of JavaScript libraries or media, images, fonts, CSS from third-party servers just makes your website brittle. It is one more way of making your website easy to break. If you need them, if you need the scripts, if you need the fonts, self-host them. There's you can do it. This is not going to affect your loading time in a negative way. And in fact, self-hosting might even improve the loading times of your website. Also, your no-script using visitors will appreciate greatly that they don't have to allow fetching scripts from a dozen random domains. But more importantly, it will also make some of the more funky anti-censorship stuff considerably easier a little bit later. And if you need a script to de-googlify your fonts, there's a script for that. I can share a link later. Another don't is just don't do just a bunch of plugins. It is very tempting to install a CMS and then load it up with dozens and dozens of different small plugins fixing or changing this thing or that thing or something else. But be very careful with plugins. One reason is that's another thing that makes your site brittle. That's another thing that might make updates difficult. The plugins might make assumptions that do not work very well with certain anti-censorship techniques. They will slow your website down, and most importantly, they're a huge, gigantic security risk. they're one of the main attack vectors. Often they're developed by a kind of a guy and his dog shop. And as soon as a plugin becomes somewhat popular, the capacity to handle reported bugs and publish security updates in a timely manner goes away quickly. At the same time, plugins usually have full access to the database and the file system. So a compromised plugin means a compromised site. Now, there have even been cases of plugins being sold by the original developers to third parties that then implemented backdoors in those plugins and issued updates that backdoored thousands of WordPress installations or other CMS installations. Of course, this is less of a problem with static site generators. We will be talking about static sites. So before we start even talking about censorship, we need to deal with, let's say, self-inflicted damage. The thing is that for a dynamic site running a CMS like WordPress, every request is really resource intensive. It means getting the data from the database, parsing the templates, laying out the HTML, and then serving it to the user. And then the same thing has to happen for another identical request, and another, and so on and so forth. I've been asked to deal with targeted DDoSes against websites more times than I can remember. Each and every single one of these turned out to be organic traffic hitting the site due to popular news item, and site just going down under a reasonable amount of traffic. For dynamic websites, any sufficiently high organic traffic is indistinguishable from DDoS. So we really have to do something about that. And one way of dealing with that is going static. Really, a static site generator, a static site is your best bet if you want to stay online and have as many options for dealing with censorship and decentralizing your web presence as possible. There are plenty of static site generators. For a while, the main problem with them was that publishing content required directly editing code, markdown files, HTML, etc. There are, however, static site generators that have a user-friendly admin interface. Please go and check them, and if you can, move to a static site. Another advantage is that the code needed to update the site and to keep the site running is different than the code actually serving the content to visitors or attackers. There is no database to be SQL injected. There's no PHP code to be exploited. There is no third-party plugins to be backdoored. Just static files on the server. This is the only thing that the visitors or potential attackers will be interacting with. Another step or another technique, if you can't go static, or if you just want to be fancy, you can start doing some serious caching at the edge. This sounds complicated, but trust me, you don't need Cloudflare for this. Developing your own caching strategy is a lot of work, and there are several pitfalls, as I have learned the hard way. But here's the good news. I already did all of that work for you, and I'm sharing it in a way that you can basically take this config and start using it. So Fasada, as I call it, is an Nginx config that has been tested and improved while in production for over 5 years at OCCRP. The basic idea is micro-caching, caching dynamic resources for short periods of time so that when a spike in request comes, most of them get served from cache, but the content stays reasonably fresh all the time. Of course, all static resources can and should be cached way longer. No need to cache them for years. An hour or two should suffice. Now, we can have a bonus round. Once you have a caching edge node deployed, and this can be a tiny VPS somewhere that really doesn't cost much and will protect your backend from crashing and burning under load. Once you have that, you can have two. Once you have two, you can have more. Depending on the amount of traffic and what you expect, you can easily scale up or down while maintaining control over your infrastructure. And since almost all requests get cached, the limiting factor becomes bandwidth. So adding a small VPS to immediately adds bandwidth, immediately adds capacity to your site without you needing to add backend capacity to handle more database requests and PHP FPM processes. The additional benefit is that all the cached content, which usually means all of the popular content on your site, could stay up and online even if the back end is down for whatever reason: updates, maintenance, bugs, problems, accidental screw-ups. This is one of the things that this config was in fact designed for. Once we have, now that we have a reasonable way of handling organic traffic, if somebody gets interested in your site, we can actually start thinking about targeted malicious actions like break-ins, DDoSes, and censorship. And surprisingly, one of the most effective and easy to use techniques is a classic game of whack-a-node, meaning when you have multiple edge nodes deployed and ready, when a DDoS hits your site, most of the time the botnet nodes that are perpetrating, carrying out the DDoS, will make the necessary DNS requests at the beginning and then just target the resulting IP addresses to maximize the bandwidth used for the actual attack. So if you have a way of quickly deploying your site to a new IP address or IP addresses, or just deploying new edge nodes and putting the traffic through them, and you have low TTL on your domain, you can move all the legitimate traffic, which is going to be checking with the DNS servers often, to the new edge nodes, while the DDoS pummels the old IP addresses. Win-win. The organic traffic, the normal visitors get a functional site, and the DDoS has its fun with the edge nodes that are now not used by the legitimate traffic. This can also be used to deal with censorship on a little bit different level by moving to a new domain and or perhaps new IP addresses every few months whenever the current ones get blocked, provided of course that the absolute URLs are not hard-coded anywhere in your site. Both of these approaches require manual intervention and are somewhat labor intensive, but can be effective and have been effective for me in short-term, in emergency situations. Sensors apparently move slowly. Another thing you can do, and I would strongly advise you to, is to make sure that your site is available in the Wayback Machine. Sensors might often miss the fact that censored websites can be accessed via the Wayback Machine. So the next step is to make sure your website is available there. Check if snapshots are made on a regular basis. If not, you can contact archiveit.org and verify that content displays correctly. This is where simplifying your site and self-hosting all resources starts paying off. This is also extremely useful in case of any calamity. Of course, I know that we all make backups, but having a public backup of all public content somewhere on Web Archive is definitely a nice additional safety net that I would strongly suggest. Next step could be just having a zip file. Just zip your content, especially if you're running a static site. This is easy. Zip your content and publish it as a zipped bundle. That way, interested parties can just download the zip file, distribute it all over over the sneakernet if everything else fails. Ideally, of course, automate this and script this anytime you publish content to your static site. Make sure that the zip file is refreshed and created, and make sure that the extracted files work well when viewed locally in a browser. This might require a little bit of fiddling with the URLs, but it's very, very much worth it, which I would like to show you now. So, demo time. I have downloaded the zip file of OCCRP's static projects. Here it is. I'm going to unzip it. This is over 400 megabytes of data, so it's plenty of content. Now let's see how this looks in a browser. Okay, boom. Let's go to English because why not? And let's say we shall see Balkan cocaine wars. All of this is a fully functional site. Of course, videos and other external embeds are still embedded from external sources, but all of the content, images, text, CSS, any JavaScript that we're using is in the zip file. And as you can see, when done properly, it is easily available locally to and available and browsable locally. And consider this: once you have a zip file like this, what you can do is you can also upload such a zip file to random places around the internet, like Dropbox folders or some Google Drive or whatever works, whatever makes most sense to potentially have the content as a zip file or as just separate files available later for your visitors if your site gets blocked. All you need to do in an emergency, if your site is down, is to publicize the URLs to the links to the to the public folders with the data. Of course, getting the word out is another thing, and I would strongly suggest creating a page on your website if you know that you might be censored, describing what you're doing to bypass censorship, or what your visitors could potentially do to access your content in case you're blocked. And of course, this is available in our zip file, because that's the whole point. Now, so far we've covered the basics. We have not discussed anything particularly surprising or anything particularly inventive. Yes, there was a bunch of best practices we all kind of knew but mostly ignored. Some code to test out, and perhaps an idea or two that were somewhat interesting. So I'll try to fix this after this disclaimer. While suggestions I made before have been tested and deployed successfully in production, ideas below, ideas that I will mention now, are mostly at proof of concept stage. I would very much appreciate anyone who would like to test them out or develop them with me, or if you're brave enough to deploy some of these things on your site. Let's get started. If we're doing a static site, we can deploy it also using peer-to-peer protocols, which are very good at avoiding censorship. For example, IPFS or BitTorrent. Again, it is a good idea to add information on how to access such content on your anti-censorship landing page, for example, by pointing visitors to IPFS gateways or BitTorrent clients. Of course, this goes against what I had said earlier. What we're trying to find are ways to evade censorship that do not require visitors to do anything special. So why am I mentioning this? Well, frankly, because both IPFS and BitTorrent have JavaScript implementations that work directly in the browser. Let's talk about service workers for a moment. They are reasonably new, but rather widely implemented browser API that lets websites load some JavaScript code and instruct the browser to run it to handle all requests related to that particular website. After the user or the visitor visits the site once, a service worker kicks in the moment the user navigates to that site again or to anything on that site in their browser before the site is loaded. This means we can use service workers to use alternative protocols to fetch content as long as they have implementations that work in the browser, even if the site is blocked. That's exactly the idea behind Samizdat. On the most basic level, it's a bit of JavaScript that installs a service worker, which then uses different techniques to get the content in case of a regular fetch doesn't work for whatever reason. The only thing the user needs to do, the only thing the visitor needs to do is to be able to visit the site once in a modern browser. Currently, Samizdat implements regular fetch and local cache to show the content quickly in case the fetch request fails, and an IPFS transport. But it is entirely entirely reasonable. It is designed in a way where plugins can be written to support other transports, which are considered to be implemented later, like a simple fetch against a fallback IP that is not exposed in the DNS zone for a given website, or pulling content from the Wayback Machine, or pulling content from an online folder like Dropbox or Google Drive or anything like that, or using WebTorrent or using the DAT protocol. Whatever is possible in JavaScript in the browser can be used in a Samizdat transport plugin. This is where it all comes together, making sure that your content is as static as it can be, and pushing it to different unexpected locations that one doesn't expect the sensors to block. Publishing it using non-standard protocols, and combining all of this with service workers API means we can now effectively work around censorship as long as the user is able to visit the site once. Demo time. We shall start with a new browser. And a clear profile in Firefox so that I can show you that there are no shenanigans in the background. Let's create a profile. Let's call it Samizdat. And let's start Firefox. Okay, so now let's visit the Samizdat website. Of course, Samizdat is deployed on the Samizdat website. What you will notice is that once the website loads, the service worker is not working, and there is no fav icon. The fun thing about this is that the fav icon is not available on the server, but it is available through IPFS. So what we can try to do is reload the site, and lo and behold, we have a fav icon, and we have service workers working, and we have gun and IPFS and other means of getting content ready and working. So now we can even do more fancy things, right? For example, the /example URL does not exist on the server. If I copy it and just curl it, it will tell me it's a 404 not found. But thanks to the magic of Samizdat, if I navigate there in a browser that has visited the site once, it will also load because this content has been pushed to IPFS and is now available in IPFS. Of course, this also means that I can just outright block the site. And while CURL will just fail miserably, again, if I visit the site in a browser that has visited it before, it will just pull the content from cache and from IPFS. Now, of course, this is not magic. There are certain limitations and there are certain assumptions. One of the most important limitations is that the visitor needs to be able to visit the site at least once. This sounds like a big ask, but from my experience, censorship is always leaky. There's always going to be a way or a day where a user or a visitor is able to access a blocked website because either the block has been lifted accidentally, or they are traveling abroad, or they got access to a VPN temporarily, or they're at a network that is not not being censored for any other reason. And most of the time, this leaky nature of censorship is not a problem for the censors, because most of the time the censorship still works. The idea behind Samizdat is to use this one narrow opportunity when the user happens to be able to access the site in a non-blocked manner, and then make sure that every time the user tries to access the site, it will work even if it's blocked. The other limitation is that depending on the transport used, only static or stratified content might be doable, might be usable through Samizdat. Of course, if we're using if we use a dynamic fetch against fallback IPs, or using Snowflake, which is Tor implemented in JavaScript, we could allow dynamic content also, but that requires a little bit more work. As with a lot of this kind of technology, there are privacy considerations. Peer-to-peer protocols can flag visitors for regime scrutiny. So, of course, your mileage may vary, and it is important to choose the transports or to choose the tools you're using to fit the purpose and the threat model of your visitors. But visiting a blocked site is already enough of a red flag to a regime, and Samizdat could in fact be used in a way to improve safety of visitors. As you've seen, it is possible to publish content through Samizdat that is not directly accessible on the regular site, which means you could have a fronting website with some innocent content, and once Samizdat kicks in for a visitor, actual content becomes available. Samizdat could also be configured to not do the fetch requests to the fronting site anymore once the service worker kicks in. So there are ways to use this technology such that it improves the safety, improves the privacy of the users. There are multiple next steps and to-dos that need to be done. This is currently a proof of concept slash alpha stage. I would definitely not suggest deploying this on a high-profile public website, but I would love to work on this a little bit more and get it to a point where it is deployed on at least a few sites. The mobile support is missing. This, of course, does not break the site. It just means that on mobile, Samizdat doesn't currently work. This is something that can be fixed with a little bit more work. But again, I didn't have the time yet. Deployment procedure needs to be way simpler, and this is my immediate next step. I'm going to focus on, and there's also going to be a lot more documentation. And finally, I'd like to implement many more transport plugins. There are, of course, similar projects. Like I spoke with a person from NetBlocks at MOSFest about a year ago, and they had a similar idea, also using service workers and hitting some fallback IPs that worked surprisingly well. The only problem is that at that time, it was about 3 years ago, service workers were not available on mobile at all. Now service worker spec is implemented in mobile browsers, so there is no reason not to develop this technology further. Another similar project was Lunet. It is not really developed anymore, but again, service worker sidestepping censorship through other means. Worth mentioning at this stage are also PushUp, which is a mobile app generator that implements Tor, meaning if the backend is not available directly because of censorship or a problem, PushUp the mobile app tries to fetch the content through Tor. We have also played with NewNode, and we tried to implement NewNode directly in PushUp. This is work that's being done at OCCRP, but it proved a little bit more complicated than expected. Finally, some closing thoughts. One main of them, I guess, would be that browser vendors should lead in this space. And to be fair, Mozilla Firefox is doing somewhat well in this area. There's the Tor Uplift project, which is backporting Tor browser patches into Firefox. There's Project Fusion, which the idea is to implement Tor directly in Firefox, perhaps to run by default in the private mode. The problem is that the Project Fusion is not really moving very fast. The last wiki edits are from over 2 years ago. One important thing that would really help would be improvements and enhancements for peer-to-peer protocols directly in browsers. That's an ask that developers behind that made to Mozilla, and so far not much has happened. But there is a Beaker browser which implements that directly in the browser, so this is not completely out of the question. Finally, internet. I'd like to make the point that internet's original strengths and promise stemmed from its decentralized nature. We need to find a way to decentralize it again. This will require work and not taking the easy way out. And of course, it's easier to deploy your site behind Cloudflare. But I'm kind of hoping that this will be more fun. But it's also on all of us and the small decisions we make, like including a JavaScript file from the third-party server or putting the site behind a behemoth CDN. It is necessary if we don't want to end up with a glorified cable TV. Thank you.
And we're back. What a great talk that was. There are so many technical people at Hope, and so many of us spend time looking for vulnerabilities, protecting against vulnerabilities. And I feel like sometimes we forget that the web is ubiquitous and yet it's also a lot of things, and you have to make a lot of choices. And I think you guided us effectively on different possibilities. We've had a number of good questions. Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
And we've had a number of good questions on the chat, and we don't have a lot of time, though. I'm going to leap in with some that I think are more of asking for advice that you would offer, or particularly advice that, like, we're having a conversation with someone, what a hacker might offer. Someone asked, you mentioned issues with Cloudflare. Someone asked, what do you think about DigitalOcean?
I think any company that becomes a de facto monopolist, the de facto default for a particular kind of service is becoming a problem, right? I am not personally using DigitalOcean. I am not a fan of DigitalOcean because it started feeling to me like another Cloudflare, another Amazon, another GitHub, for example, right? Where a lot of eggs are in the single basket, right?
Mm-hmm.
So of course, if it fits your threat model, if it fits your needs, go for it, but be wary of anything that smells of centralization and smells of abusing or using a position like that for their own gain.
Yeah, thanks for that. Another point of advice, I'm sure you've had these conversations. I'm not sure how polite you are, but when you're interacting with someone that's using WordPress, using Drupal, and it's mostly because they just don't know how to do the types of things that you've talked about.
Totally.
What sort of guidance do you offer?
Well, a lot of this guidance was in the talk, right? So don't install all of the random plugins that you can get your hands on. This is step one. To consider not including all of the JavaScript libraries from random places. Try self-hosting it. If you're able to host a website, to host a WordPress website, you're able to self-host this JavaScript stuff that you're using. Same with fonts, same with images, same with whatever else that you need. This is where I would really start. If you have the capacity, because of course, obviously, in a lot of places, the capacity is simply not there. This is why services like Cloudflare strive, because there's a small independent media organization in somewhere, and they just don't have the capacity, the technical capacity to handle this. So again, your mileage may vary, but if you have the capacity, try researching static site generators. This will be a way better way of publishing content if you're worried about DDoSes, if you are worried about organic traffic bringing down your website. And the flip side of this question, I think, and the flip side of my answer here would be, dear hackers, this is a hacker conference. Please consider volunteering your time and helping out a small independent media site somewhere in the world with your expertise and your knowledge. This can make all of the difference. I cannot stress this enough. A tech team of 4 or 5 people that I had the privilege of working with was able to handle a lot of, provide a lot of help to 20 or 30 small media organizations across the world. So every hour, every minute, every effort that you can make in this direction really, really counts.
That's such a great invitation and a call for advocacy, because you're right. Hackers hopefully have the skills that the, say, content providers, small businesses don't have. We're just in our last minute or so here. And I guess one thing that I'm also wondering that you can comment on is clearly it takes a lot of effort to keep up with all the technologies that you described, and you're spending a lot of time, upgrading versions and finding bugs and all this stuff. And I'm curious, in your experience, making all of the best choices, let's say we followed all of your recommendations, how much work or how often are you still going to be making changes and making new decisions, finding new technologies, that type of thing?
So that's a difficult question. It's hard for me to answer because I only have this one vantage point where I was working for a reasonably large media organization handling one of the things I was handling was website hosting for our member centers. And for me, that was a reasonable amount of work. It wasn't all of my work, but it was a reasonable amount of work. But that work would go dramatically down if, again, random plugins were not a problem, if random third-party scripts were not a problem, every step you can make to simplify your let's say CMS footprint or complexity of your CMS setup really matters. Also in the terms of how much time you will spend keeping it up and running and updated and all of that. And the other side, the other point I'm going to make is that the Fasada setup that we were using really helped us in a lot of ways, including whenever there was a member center or a website that we were hosting which did not have the capacity to upgrade their website, and we did not have the capacity to help them with that because for some reason it was either a very complicated, complex setup or anything else in the way. At least we knew that due to the caching and due to the setup, most of the resources were read-only for almost every visitor, which means this was a way smaller exposure, or way smaller attack surface, which meant also that we had a little bit more capacity or breathing space to implement necessary changes when they were necessary.
Thanks. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, we really appreciate all your guidance, your knowledge, and I think I really particularly appreciated that you're inviting hackers to help to make this world a better place. It's been an illuminating talk. We're at the end of our time. This has been Michael Ryzik-Wozniak talking to us about the censorship is no longer interpreted as damage, and I think more importantly, what we can do about that damage. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.